So one of the things that's been remarkable in all of the Middle East unrest has been the degree to which technology has been almost a protagonist in the conflicts. I think it's too much to say that these are Facebook revolutions or Twitter revolutions. I don't buy it. I don't think social media is necessarily what causes the conflict and the unrest in the Middle East. I think things related to a lack of democracy, high food prices, frustration with corruption, these are the things which at the end of the day are really causing the dissent. That said, technology is clearly doing three things. Number one, it's accelerating movement making. So one of the things that are making everybody's head spin, particularly all of us diplomats, is how fast this is going. And it's going so fast because the open platforms of social media allow for organizing that normally would have taken months or years to just take weeks. The second thing it's doing is it's making weak ties strong. So if you look in Tahrir Square, for example, there were people from the Muslim Brotherhood standing shoulder to shoulder with 28-year-old Western-educated digital hipsters. Part of what brought them together was social media. Now, I'm very skeptical that the weak ties that were made strong for the purposes of dissent will translate into governance. I'm not hopeful about that. But what we do see is that weak ties are made stronger for the purposes of dissent because of social media. And then the third thing, and this is really radical, is the degree to which so many of these movements are either leaderless or have widely distributed leadership because of technology. The Che Guevara of the 21st century is the network. And even if you look at Egypt and Wael Ghonim, this young Google employee who many people wanted to dub the leader of the revolution, he rejected it. He said, no, 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 I'm not the leader. The network is the leader in these revolutions. And when he was asked what's next, he said, ask Facebook. So what that says to me is that it doesn't take a Che Guevara-like figure. It doesn't take the charismatic single figure to inspire and organize the masses in order for there to be a revolution. Today, because of social media, leadership can be widely distributed. You know, I think that the roots of the revolutions really come from political disenfranchisement and economic disenfranchisement. So I think it's entirely too great a leap to say that the dynamic in Tunis is similar to the one in Rome, or the dynamic in Cairo is similar to the one in Copenhagen, or the dynamic in Bahrain is like the dynamic in Barcelona. There are two different political dynamics and two different economic dynamics. So even though this technology empowers people very widely, I think it's a bridge too far to say that they're going to be tools of revolution. However, we've already seen in the United States the degree to which social media can help produce political change. Barack Obama is president of the United States in part because of how effectively his campaign used the internet. So some of the political change that we're seeing that's being fueled by social media in the Middle East, we've already seen political change produced in the West in part because of technology. And what we're increasingly seeing is in European countries more and more leaders becoming savvy about how to use these technologies. In Italy, for example, Nicky Vendola, who is a member of the opposition to Berlusconi, is doing much of his organizing and doing much of his movement building over social media. So we're beginning to see early examples in Europe of social media fueled political change as well, though it's not necessarily revolutionary in nature. So I think that part of what connection technologies do is they take power away from the nation state and large institutions and give it to individuals and small institutions. And so very big companies and very big governments are oftentimes those which are most roiled, which are most disrupted by connection technologies. Because what it does is it puts power in the hands of individuals that was previously unimaginable. And this can be for both good or ill. Technology itself is value neutral. It takes on the values and intentions of the users. So Secretary Clinton, for example, when she talks about technology, in the past she's likened it to nuclear power, which can either fuel a city or destroy it. She's compared it to steel, which can be used to build a hospital or build a machete. So it takes on the values and intentions of the users. And when people have good intentions in mind, it can be powerful. So for example, after the earthquake in Haiti, one of the things that very young diplomats in Hillary Clinton's State Department did, none of whom had big names, none of whom were celebrities, none of whom were particularly powerful in the conventional sense, they built a campaign to get people to donate for earthquake relief. $10 a text message. And we raised $35 million in less than 3 weeks. This shows how these technologies can be used for good. But they can also be used for ill. You know, we can see, for example, if you go into an internet cafe in South Beirut, it's jam-packed with young boys playing video games. What are those young boys doing? They're playing video games that have been modified by Hezbollah so that instead of shooting monsters or shooting aliens, Hezbollah has changed the video game so that they're shooting Israeli soldiers. So everybody's innovating. People are innovating for good, people are innovating for ill. And what that does is it puts the onus on European and the American government to keep up. You know, if we just view the changes that are produced by social media and we curl into the fetal position, if we say, oh, these tools are very scary, they're very disruptive, you know, it's too risky to use them, then I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. Our enemies are going to use them, and they're going to have the playing field entirely to themselves. Al-Qaeda is very sophisticated right now about building jihadi websites, the purpose of which is to radicalize young Muslim boys and to enter into lives of violent extremism. In the face of this, we can't say, oh, the horror that is the internet. No, what we have to do is ourselves become more aggressive, ourselves become more intelligent, and ourselves become increasingly engaged in these network spaces. Because one thing that is inevitable is the inevitability of the increasing power and the increasing ubiquity of our information networks. So on the idea of control, the 21st century is a lousy time to be a control freak. And the kind of control that we as diplomats oftentimes covet, it's much harder to have in this day and age. During the Cold War, when our foreign policy was built around a much more simpler construct, the struggle between democracy and communism, our diplomats, though they worked very hard, things were much more straightforward. Today we live in a world with an increasing number of non-state-based threats, where, as Secretary Clinton has said, the promise and peril of the 21st century is no longer bound by natural borders or by vast distances. And so the whole idea of control, I think, is a little bit illusory, and I think it's a little bit naive. And I think that it's actually dangerous for governments to try to exert too much control over the internet, lest we destroy that which has made it special. So the State Department has decided to meet people where they are. It's increasingly the case that people use social media. In Jordan, people use Maktub. In Japan, people use Mixi. In much of the rest of the world, people use tools like Twitter and Facebook. So in whatever country it is, whatever tool people are using in that country, that's what we want our diplomats using. More than 200 million people now use Twitter. And it's proven to be a terrific tool for getting information to people directly, without government censorship, without intermediaries. So what the State Department has done is we are now tweeting not just in English, but also in French, in Spanish, in Hindi, in Farsi, and in Arabic. You know, we think that these are powerful tools to reach people directly. And in a country like Iran, where the government significantly censors information that comes in over satellite, over the radio, where the state controls so much of media, part of why we decided to start tweeting in Farsi was to be able to reach the Iranian people directly without the government mucking around with our messaging. We're also encouraging individual diplomats to use Twitter. And the reason for this is pretty simple. People tend to follow individuals and not institutions on Twitter. It's just the way it works. We might like for it to be the case that people follow more institutions, but at the end of the day, people identify more with individuals. And we've seen, for example, with our spokesman, PJ Crowley, tweeting from @PJ Crowley, that it can be a very powerful way of reaching people all around the world. And this isn't so much about our picking a social media way of reaching people so much as it is recognizing the tools that people use and recognizing that in a 21st century information environment, we have to expand the kinds of tools that we're using as diplomats. The single most important tool in the toolbox of American diplomats is our diplomatic engagement. When Hillary Clinton sits across the table from a foreign minister, a prime minister, or a prince, the most powerful thing she can do is push on an issue. And so the strongest thing that the United States is doing with internet freedom, yes, we're spending tens of millions of dollars in grants for internet freedom. Yes, we've got all manner of program, but the single most powerful and important thing we can do in the area of internet freedom is engage diplomatically. We saw this in Tunisia and in Egypt. When the Tunisian government hacked Facebook and tried to get the personally identifiable information for over 1 million of its citizens, we convoked the Tunisian ambassador in Washington. We hauled him in. We also addressed it in Tunisia. We dealt with them publicly and privately. When the Mubarak government in Egypt created an unprecedented communications blackout, we spoke up. We spoke up publicly, we spoke out privately. There's nothing more important or more powerful than the voice of the President and the voice of the Secretary of State. And President Obama and Secretary of State each spoke out loudly when there was a communications blackout in Egypt. Both called for the end of the communications blackout, and they specifically mentioned social media. So what does this mean? The first thing is governments have got to take lessons from Tunisia and Egypt that if you try to black out communications to your citizens, you're going to do nothing but enrage them. And it's going to blow up in your face. It did not work in Tunisia. It did not work in Egypt. It's not going to work other places. The second thing you have to know is, if you do this, we're going to speak up. Friend or foe, the United States is going to engage. It's a foreign policy priority of ours. We believe in a series of universal rights. And rights like the freedom of expression, the freedom of association and assembly, the freedom of the press. In the year 2011, those rights are increasingly exercised on the internet. And if a government takes action to throttle back or end those rights, then we're going to speak out.